Hello gamers! So let's get into modules and blueprints. So what is the difference between a module and a blueprint? They have different buttons. So here's the blueprints and here's the modules. This is what the module selection looks like, and this is what the blueprints. You can edit a module from in here. And this is where you do all of your editing for blueprints and modules. But the basic difference between a blueprint and a module is that blueprints have cores. So that means that modules can be placed on top of existing station and ship blueprints, whereas you can only have one station in a sector, and two ship cores cannot be combined to make a ship. So if I were to say build a station, or if I have a station, for example, like here, I can just attach a module here, and assuming there's no ship in the way, assuming that there is an attachment point, which it seems like I'm over some limit in the system. So let's just jump over to something that has less cells, like that. You'll see it snap on. This means that, from my personal experience, that it is best to keep ships simple in most cases, and it is best to keep the stations as starts to bigger things. So you'll notice that I have generic starts here. I have a generic coal start, a generic fuel start, a generic antimatter start, and a generic uranium start. And I basically have just attached basic power generation. Generally, as much power generation is going to be required for most systems, and the storage for those things, and some batteries to just kind of fill it in and round it up, make it square. So if I'm going to build this, let me actually grab a system where I can do that. Build. And actually have auto builders going. I can make sure that you actually route stuff to places, and now I can just do whatever I want. And so I make most of my things in modules and not in stations or anything like that. The one exception to that is defensive installations, because you will often have to rebuild them, and it is easier to do that from a blueprint than to have to go in and like rebuild a thing from scratch. So for example, when I was fighting yellow, this station got attacked an awful lot, so I built it the way that I wanted to, and then I saved it as a blueprint so that I could go back in and rebuild it after it took damage. That's also the reason why I have this defensive station in here, because this is in a bunch of different places, and its entire job is to basically keep enemy ships from getting through. So these get attacked an awful lot. That's why I have the blueprint in here, and I'm not piecemeal building every single one of these. But you will also notice that I have defense encampments for each weapon type, and in a left and right orientation and an up and down orientation, so that I may flip the direction of the turret, and so that I can place it looking up and down, left and right. This isn't super important because turrets can just shoot over the station that they're attached to, but for some of the bigger stations, the range is an issue, which is why these are so spaced out. There is like a maximum range that weapons have, so I did kind of like put them out and place them in, space them out and such. So now that we have a station built, we can decide on like what we want to do with that station. And so I have a bunch of different basically solutions to different problems that I have in here. And the question is like, what do I want to do with it? So I can place this, have it be built, and now this will basically make hydrogen. So now I have a place where hydrogen is being made. Because I'm using an advanced machine here called the Materializer, I can make it just from energy. So I can say, okay, I want to make hydrogen here. I can decide I want to make, you know, multi-tools. I can decide I want to make nanites. I can decide I want to make plastic. Like whatever I want this system to be used for now, I can now do that just by placing it. I want a large amount more energy because this is taking up energy. I can say, well, I can just place a very large uranium power plant on top of it. And ship in the uranium fuel rod. And ship in the coolant. And now I have a very large amount of power production very quickly without having to plan a thing out. I make things as complicated as, you know, this to something as simple as this trade hub, which is something I tack onto a lot of stations where I want to pipe something down to the system. And so I have a storage container in front, and I just don't have to sit there and redraw it every single time. It just makes your building time so much faster that it's just really a game changer for how you can play the game. I also use modules for when I'm aesthetically building a ship. So when I was building this, I made these corners with a module. In N, or if you hit N, in the blueprints menu, you can bring up your modules and place different things. So I was using this angle to build those corners on there. So stations I keep simple because they're start. Let's talk about ships. I tend to keep ships to a specific task and as simple as possible because ships will more likely to be attacked than anything else. And oftentimes the job that they are doing is very simple and they don't need to be complicated. So this is literally an engine with a bunch of batteries attached to it. So this doesn't need to be more complicated than this. I could take this out or take out these batteries and add higher tier batteries. But there's not, for an energy carrier, it doesn't need to be more complicated than this. For a cargo ship, it doesn't really need to be more complicated than this. It's just a bunch of storage, some energy storage, some physical and liquid storage. It doesn't need to be more complicated than this unless you want it to be, but there is no benefit because traders only will trade in one item at a time. There is no reason to have this be more complicated than that. The one quasi exception is auto builders. So you'll notice here that I have a bunch of pipes going to a bunch of turrets coming from a bunch of storages. And so if I'm building, say, a very large battleship, like this one, which is what I've been using in my current playthrough, this needs a lot of gold, titanium composite built on top of it. And so this has a bunch of gold, titanium piping into these because one of these storage containers cannot feed all of these turrets. Even two of these cannot feed all 6 turrets at the same time. And so with 3, I can have all of these lasers pumping out gold titanium composite at their maximum rate, so they build much faster. And you'll notice I have like extra iron here. I have like 1 gold because I'm using a lot of titanium gold for the battery storage because these use titanium gold. But I do still have it on here, and I have a couple of other ones, such as this iron copper, which is used for like missile turrets. So this is more complicated because I need to get a lot of different resources to a lot of different turrets, but that's kind of the exception to the rule as I flip through here. I have like a bunch of tests that I was doing and like trying to make ships look kind of the way that I want while still being functional. I do have some more advanced ones like this one, which is basically an antimatter generator and a zone for a bunch of antimatter, and this was meant to jump around and colonize colonies because some of the colonies are like 1,000,000 energy per claim, so I needed a bigger ship for that. I have this is the upgrade for the flagship. So obviously I needed that. I have like a couple of weapon tests, and I have a couple of target dummies that I was testing different things with. But generally speaking, ships should be kind of simple, or as simple as they can be, because A, you will probably have to build a lot of them. I have like 15 traders, and because they will almost certainly encounter combat situations and they will almost need to be rebuilt. The reason why I moved from this to this is because this uses less ammo because I only have 2 storage containers instead of 3, and it doesn't use antimatter to power it, so I didn't have to shield the antimatter as much to make sure that the antimatter didn't blow up my ship. And I wanted a lot more armor because missiles were doing a lot more damage than expected. So I simplified down this design because it is very easy to repair this, to fill it up with energy and send it back out. The one negative of this design over the other design is I do have to bring it back a lot more often to fill up these batteries. I might come back later and put an antimatter generator in here and work out a system where I feel safe enough with the antimatter generator on the ship where it doesn't blow up and take like the friendly ship next to it, but I'm not quite there yet. Although I do have to be honest that if a shot gets through any of this armor and hits anything in here, the whole thing is just going up and dying. There isn't a whole lot you can do once an enemy gets through your armor. So that's the basic rundown of like the design choice. Ships should be simple because generally they perform one task and they aren't complexity isn't super rewarded in ships because you're oftentimes automating what they do. Stations, in my opinion, should be simple starts to things. Like this is used very early in the playthrough to harness and refine coal for power generation. That's why they're here, so that when I have a new game, I can just plop them down. And for defensive stations that are going to be hit and hurt a lot. And then modules should be kind of like where your complexity is. So for example, the A-lens production. I'm going to explain why I have to do this in a minute. So if this runs at a decent speed, you will... It takes a while to, because there's just a lot of machines here. So this makes annihilation lenses. So it takes in the nickel and the titanium gold plate, and it comes through here and it makes lens frames into laser prototype lenses, into green laser lenses, into red laser lenses, into proton lenses, into annihilation lenses. And you may say, that's a lot of mess. The reason why it's done this way is A, I wanted it to be compact so that I could tie all these into a base and have a lot of production that was very tileable. And 2, because different items have different production types. So this builds to a frame in 2 seconds. So I have a lens frame for 2 seconds and 2 seconds. The laser lens prototype takes 2 seconds to build. The green laser takes 2 seconds to build. The red lens takes 2 seconds to build, but the proton lens takes 4 seconds. So I need twice as many machines from this. So it goes from 2 to 4. That's the reason why this starts to get a bit more convoluted and complicated. And then the same thing's true for the annihilation. It takes 4. So I had to pipe in the nanites, and then I had to get these lenses into these machines, then pumped out, plus get that in. The good thing about this setup is that it was very easy to scale it down to make the lower level lenses when I needed stuff. So because I can just delete this section. I can hit save, I can hit copy, name it P lens, which I'm not going to do that because I have a blueprint for it. Delete this last section and then just put in the storages here, and then I can delete this section and then do the same thing and then do the same thing. And then if you build out the whole thing, you can always go back through with a module and copy and then scale it down, or copy and then be like, I want to make this plate here and not have to ship in this specific plate, but just the raw materials. You will notice that I had to place a battery. Blueprints will not simulate unless there is power to do so. The simulation will half the storage of everything, liquids, physical items, and batteries, and then it will basically try to run from there. That is done so you can simulate power generation or items in, items out, that kind of thing. But it does mean that after you get done, you have to go through, redelete the battery, and then resave after you've simulated it to make sure that all of the pipes are going to the right places and that everything's connecting the right way and all that. There is a better way to make blueprints or modules, and I will show you what that is. So down here you'll notice that I have a test bed. What this test bed is it is just energy generation in the form of an antimatter generator, which will take antimatter from this storage, which is filled to half, pump in the full antimatter container, and then it will pump out the empty container. One of the things to remember is that if an antimatter generator cannot pump out the empty container, it will not generate energy. So keep that in mind. That's why that has to be there. But this could be any form of energy generation and just whatever batteries you can put in here. And the entire point is so that you can do the next bit. So I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument, that I'm come up with, build, and like how this comes out. I can design this in here, decide on what I want to do, and then I can just drag and select the whole thing, hit Control C, and then hit Control S. And that will save it as a module. So I can simulate, test, run, get it to where I want, and then save it over to a new module. The other benefit to this is that after you do that, you still have this here, but it also means that, say you like how this section works, but you don't like how this section works, or some section in the middle, for example. So instead of having to like delete and do everything, what you can do is be like, okay, so I want to kind of like back this up and move it up here, and then I'm going to go through and change things. Like, let's say I want to downsize this for small containers, right? I can come through and be like, okay, well, I only want to use tier 1s because in my current playthrough, I only have T1 storages. You can also hit the revert button if you fuck up like I just did. Edit. So I'm going to copy, drop it off, and be like, okay, so let's delete this whole middle section because we don't need it. I don't want that. I don't want that. I can be like, okay, well, this is going to have to be closer together, right? Let's get rid of these batteries. And these batteries realistically should not be on this blueprint. I don't like putting batteries on modules now because I like to place the batteries after the fact so that I can kind of fill in the empty space. So I can say, well, I want a string of these here. So I'm going to build like this, and then I'm going to go like this, and this is going to take titanium gold. So then I'm going to take this and just copy it. I messed that up. So I have to now delete everything because I'm good at this game. Copy, 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 copy. I don't want this here. And then I can be like, oh man, like I can't just move because you can't copy or you can't cut. You can delete the section and be like, you know, this is useful. So let's just copy this over. And then now I can, you see the tubes at the end are stopping my copying. So I have to cancel. I want to copy this. I can be like, okay, well, I want to move this up. So now, because I have this like blueprint here, or this like template here, I can easily modify this and have a reference to go back through and say, you know, oh, you know, the rare resource needs to be here. That's the reason I have it set up the way that I want. So if this is titanium copper, it uses less iron or less gold. So I need to put less gold in the middle. I generally prefer my things to be symmetrical, even though that's not strictly necessary. But my brain will not be happy if I don't. So I can be like, okay, so I need twice as much titanium than I do gold. So the inside ones are going to be gold. Copy to selected storage, and the outside ones are going to be titanium. And then I need to copy to all machines. And because now I have twice as much titanium as I do gold. So now I can see like, okay, so is that going to work? Did I mess up something in my print? And I can already tell you I did because I messed up right there. So I need to come in here and I need to turn those save. Okay, well, did that work? Well, everything's feeding. Everything seems to be working. Ah, I messed up there, see? And so I can be like, oh, okay, well, that's easy enough to fix. And simulate again. That's messed up. So come in, do it again. And you'll have to come through and like simulate a blueprint a bunch to get it to kind of like do what you want at the rate that you want. The whole reason why I know that this needs 2 lines is because I sat down and was like, all right, I want to simulate out this many compositors, and I wasn't able to do it with 2 or with just 1 line of the more common resource. So I had to put in a second line to kind of fill in. I could probably add more stampers because I don't I have like a bit of backflow here, but I'm pretty sure that when I did this the first time, I tested out another stamper and it meant that the last stamper was always a little empty. So I took it off and opted for the backflow as opposed to having a stamper that wasn't running and taking up room. So that's kind of like, that's why this system works is A, you don't have to manage power at this point, and B, because you can copy to a different place and see the template, you can be like, okay, so like, what do I want to change? Like, what do I need to change? What do I need to change to make this work? Actually, one of the things that I probably would do is move this storage here because this is a lot of empty space and I'd rather have this here and then maybe put an extra gold storage even though I don't need it, and make this more rectangular so that it's easy to post into a different thing. One of the things to remember is that when you're dealing with a cell count, it can be really helpful to go through and remove these cells, these like little blank cells. And I could also realistically come up here instead and do this. And that will help me cut down on my cell count. Because that is relevant on some cell amounts. And it's the reason why, for example, why this has all these cutouts is because I was putting this into a system where the cell count, I was reaching the upper limit of my cell count, and each one of these allowed, cutting each one of these out of all of these allowed me to put like an extra couple of power stations in. So cell count does matter even at the upper limits depending on what you're doing, kind of like what you're simulating. So an example of that would be this. This is my energy station to make antimatter, and you will notice that there's a lot, and there isn't a lot of spare not used cells. If I were to place another one of these, I'd have to go through and delete these extra little spaces to probably get another one of these in here. But I am at a place with this power generation that I'm not having antimatter power issues. I will explain this at a later date. This is a much more advanced use of the material. So that is kind of like the basics of how I think about and how I use blueprints and modules. Modules are solutions to problems. You need more T1 circuits, make a blueprint or make a module for T1 circuits. Or make, a module for T1s, T2s, and T3s so that you can supply all three of them. I have one for oil because I needed T1 circuits on a planet where I actually had oil available. If you need multi-tools, I can just go grab this. I don't have to design this every single time. It makes it so you don't have to repetitively come up with tasks. But this does mean that I do keep my starts for stations to be very simple. And that's kind of, it has greatly reduced the amount of time that I take to build stations and build different things. I also use it a lot to design ships. So this ship array or weapons array was specifically used to design one of my ships because this was going to stay the same even if the outer shape of the ship was different. That was used for this. So even though this all changed, like this armor changed a bunch, this how this comes out in bulges to protect this antimatter generator was all changed. The center array didn't change, so I just built the ship around the center array. So why would I rebuild that over and over again? And I think that's all I have on blueprints, stations, and modules. Keep your ship simple unless you have a reason to avoid it, or unless you have a reason to do otherwise. Keep your station starts simple unless they are going to see combat and you're going to have to repair them a lot. And modules should be kept to a task that you're going to be doing repetitively. Like I have a lot of these composite stations up building or making composites for things. I have a bunch of these construction nodes for when I want to build shipyards. That's what this is used for. I have a lot of places where I needed coolant, so I have a coolant add-on to just make coolant, and ammos and things like that. So you will eventually build up like a library of modules that you can just stick in when you have a specific problem in a specific place. This array uses a very advanced machine called matter materializers to make nickel ingots because in my map seed there is a very low amount of nickel in the world. So I needed a way to mass generate a large amount of nickel, and this can be flopped out for basically any resource, assuming that you have the power to run it. I do want to take a quick second to talk about some of the more advanced machines and some of the misconceptions with those machines. I was going to cut this short, but I do think that I need to cover this because I'm getting a lot of questions about it, and it does matter. So I'm going to clear off this. Oh, that is one thing I forgot to explain. Whenever I make something new, I tend to copy the testbed and start from scratch. So instead of doing all of this, if I had done this correctly, I would have I'm going to explain that little bit of weirdness and how to kind of get rid of it and why it happens, but let me get this part done. So instead of doing what I did here, what I should have done is hit copy and then test bed matter materializer. And that way I can mess this up and then go back and grab the original test bed and just delete this when I'm done messing around. I am going to take a moment and do some of the more advanced machines. I went through pretty much all of these, or will go through all of these through my playthrough. Extractors refine ores into pure things. Refineries make all of your liquids, including nanites. Stampers make pure things into ingots. Fabricators make the more complex things like ammos and multi-tools. Compositors composite to pure resources and make a composite out of them. Composites are very useful for armors and ships, and sometimes they are used for other things such as making hydrogen. And then the rest of these these three you know about because I talked in my other thing. The two things that I've left off are the Matter Materializer and the Antimatter Reactor. So I'm going to talk about this one first. I'm going to try to make the end of this a little quicker. So Matter Materializer lets you materialize any resource in its pure form at the cost of great amounts of energy. The thing to remember is that the research for the Matter Materializer doesn't make the amounts of energy that a thing costs to make lower. It makes the Matter Materializer work faster. So this energy consumption is very high, 20,000 a second, but it's because this pumps out a large amount of uranium very quickly because of the upgrade. So save. So that pumps out, even at 1 speed, that's a lot of uranium. But it does not change the cost per uranium. This is also true for the Antimatter Reactor. The Antimatter Reactor, the upgrades for the Antimatter Reactor do not make making antimatter less expensive. It just means that it will pump out more antimatter more quickly. Other things to remember for the Matter Materializer, all of the fuels short of water, so uranium, carbon, and oil, are more expensive than the energy you can get from them. So you cannot take carbon, refine it into carbon ingot, and get more energy out of it than you put in. The exemption from this is a very advanced method where you use water, nickel, and iron to create hydrogen, and that is a self-sustaining, self-running system that will generate twice the energy that it uses to make the hydrogen to burn it. You're basically trading a lot of research and a lot of infrastructure to basically have free power, but it does require a lot of research, and it requires a lot of room and cell count. That is the point of this module, which uses matter materializers to create free power, essentially. So matter materializer gives you iron and it gives you nickel, which you then turn into iron nickel composite, which then gets fed with water from matter materializers to generate hydrogen down here, and it will burn the hydrogen for power, and this system, even without upgrades, is still net positive for energy. And it's even more net positive if you're going to pump in your own water or your own iron or your own nickel. But this is a very late game power option, and at that point generally you have uranium, and uranium is, generally speaking, it's better to just use up uranium than to use this system. This is very useful for I've seen some people use these on energy carriers. So energy carrier will generate its own power. But also this is very big and very complex. So keep that in mind. One of the things I did want to talk about is pipes and some of the weirdness with pipes. So if you have a tank and another tank and you have them set to different liquids, you have to be very careful about how you are going to run those pipes. Let's say I want to go here, and let's say I want to go here with fuel. If you run pipes next to each other, they will start to override one another, and there is no good way to fix that. So you cannot run pipes next to each other, so you have to have a gap between the pipes. There is a way to get around that. I did not tell you to do that. You can use junctions to help with that, but it can be very hard to use a junction because you have to constantly space everything out. So this pipe is going to have to come down here, and this pipe is going to have to go here, and I'm going to have to delete these to get that crossing to work. And this is actually going to have to go up here. So there's like a lot of auto snapping that happens with pipes. The way, and that's not going to work, that's going to have to come out here. So perfect example of how this system can be a bit complicated and convoluted to get to work kind of the way you want. The one exception that I found to this is if you use junctions the whole way. So if you have, for example, a tank here and a tank here, these are different things because these tanks can be, even though tanks generally crossfeed, if they're set to different things, they don't crossfeed. But so you need to run like a long distance. You can use junctions and run it like that. And then when you get to the end, the one caveat is this has to branch out before you end your junctions. This obviously looks very ugly and most people would rather space, but I did want to mention that in some niche situations this might be a useful solution to a specific problem that you are having. And I did want to mention it because it is useful in some like corner cases where you are very short on room between things. The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick was Antimatter Generator. So the Antimatter Generator is essentially a form of energy storage. It does not generate energy on its own. Each antimatter container can hold 1 million energy and can be discharged at 100% efficiency. Obviously that part is not super weird because batteries do the same thing, but it is 10 times more dense than your T3 batteries. This can be really useful when space is at a premium at specific spots. It is very useful on military ships that use laser cannons because lasers are very energy hungry creatures. So you have to generate the energy and then you can consume the energy somewhere else. These do need a battery attached. If there is no battery attached, this will not act as a battery. This needs to push out to a battery in order for it to work. The other thing that is like this is trade hubs and teleportation relays. In specific regards to tanks. So if this is set to, let's say, oil, and this is set to water, and this is told to pull up water, I'm going to have to go out the other side. You cannot use these to go directly to a machine like this. Because if I delete this tank, you'll see how these turned gray? This does not have an internal storage, so somewhere on this line there must be a tank. There must be a water specific tank because pipes basically don't have a throughput, and so they are directly drawing from this over to this, but they don't have like an internal buffer or anything, and neither do trade hubs and neither do teleportation relays. So there must be something between, the machine you're using, and the trade hub or the teleportation relay. And that is pretty much it. Yeah. So I'm going to end this here. If you have any questions, please ask me either here or on Discord. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm happy to help you out with blueprints, that kind of thing. So just message me and I'll either forward you something that I've already made, or we can talk about how you might be able to improve a specific blueprint. And I will talk to you all later, and I hope that you have a good night.